Oh my gosh, hey guys, welcome back to Lives Vivas. I totally forgot to film my Black Death Viva. Gotta find it in my Vivas. Right here. Got it. Yeah, so I totally forgot to do this one. I'm sorry, Jared. I'm sorry, Dr. Parker. Sorry for whoever else cares. But yeah. So today, the question, or last week, or whatever week this was, the question was, how did the Black Death impact European society? Very relevant, very ironic, very funny. Good job, Dr. Berger. I'm impressed with your timing. So, although we often think and look at the Black Death as impacting just the medieval medical population and medical science stuff, the Black Death actually was a pandemic, and it transformed European culture in many fundamental ways, including medically, economically, and social politically. So let's get some, there's a lot of misconceptions out there about the Black Death, and so we're gonna bust some myths, if you don't mind me saying, about the Black Death. Number one myth is the song, the little nursery rhyme, Ring Around the Rosie, is actually, is thought to have been about the Black Death, but it's actually not about the Black Death. It is from the, I don't even know why this is in my ear. It's from the 1800s, and that's way after the Black Death happened. So, that was out. And another myth is that the Black Death is called Black Death because it turns your skin black, and that is also a myth. So those are just two myths that I just busted. So you don't have to even, if people say something, you can be like, myth. But yeah. So the Black Death contributed to three kind of fundamental things, and it influenced European culture in a lot of fundamental ways. It actually helped feudalism decline and kind of took down feudalism. It was kind of the end of the Middle Ages, and it emerged of the Renaissance. So the Black Death was actually really important. Let's talk about medically. Medically, the Black Death was super important, obviously, because it was a disease and stuff. It changed the health of Europeans. So it changed how Europeans viewed the medicines, and it left a dramatic imprint of European genes. So this is interesting. You can actually see the genes of the Europeans that had the Black Death, and kind of gets passed down through the generations. The Black Death also caused a lot of psychological issues. So mental health wise, it caused a lot of PTSD, and just kind of a lot of mental health too, which is really interesting. It also kind of slowed down Europe's population numbers, just because a lot of people were dying, and so it kind of slowed that down. And also a lot of babies and older people would get it, so so the Black Death, the time periods it arrives in Europe in 1348, and in just 2 years it takes out a quarter to a half of the region's population. That's insane. So it just goes through Europe and just takes down people. Everyone who survived it though falls into this depression, and it becomes this really dark time in Europe's history, which makes sense, and this kind of goes back to the mental health thing too. There was a lot of PTSD and a lot of depression going around Europe because it was just such an insane amount of time. So a lot of Christians during this time period became more religious because they thought that God had sent the plague to punish their sins. So some Christians would actually whip themselves and hurt themselves because they thought that they deserved this plague and God was mad at them. And others lived their life with no limits, kind of like the YOLO, #YOLO kind of living. Just kind of went out and had some good times, but probably they weren't good times for eternity. So Jean de Vinti witnessed the disease's impact in northern France, and he says, quote, "He who was well one day was dead the next and being carried to his grave," end quote. And so it struck very fast, it hit very fast, it killed people very, very quickly. So that was kind of medically how Black Death impacted Europe. Black Death also impacted Europe economically. So the Black Death transforms Europe's economy. It increases the wage for many workers because the population was going down, and so there was just this like need for workers and people to come work. It also changes Europe's approach to agriculture, and it allowed much of Europeans to return to the unfarmed forests. So it kind of like opens up this thing. People were probably more in isolation and stuff, so they became farmers, they farm their own land, they get their own food. There was this like need for workers, there was a need for that, so the wages obviously went up, and it changed a lot of stuff. So for the economic side of the Black Death, monasteries, Black Death really hit the monasteries hard because the monasteries were taking in these sick people and taking care of them and giving them refuge, and so the clergy actually began to die out, and this leaves a shortage of serving and shortage of the clergy. And so they kind of get new people in because they need people to help. And so they hastily train these inexperienced clergymen who know a little bit about the medicines and the traditions of the monasteries and of the church. And so they try, but it's just not like the same. It's just very rushed. So this is a quote by Dr. Parker, and it's quote, "Widespread death eroded the strict hereditary class divisions they had for centuries, bound peasants to land owned by local lords," end quote. So it just kind of, again, like, defeated the feudalism, and everything kind of just came together, and class divisions kind of fell, and the peasants were still bound to the land owned by the lords because they needed work. And so even though there wasn't like this class systems, there were still people working, and trying their best to survive. So social politically, the Black Death changes Europe in this way too. It just really changes the culture politically and socially. It leads to the rise of central control of imports by the monarchs. It leads to the rise of anti-Semitic attacks, and it ends the dominance of serfdom and other elements of the... I can't read my writing, man. Whatever. It just kind of... it kind of ends feudalism, which is this political structure, and it takes kind of the power of the monarchs away and gives it to the just this like central control, and it ends kind of it leads to a rise of anti-Semitic attacks. So a lot of Europeans blamed the Jews for the Black Death, and these poor Jews, they get the hardest time in history, let's just put it that way. But they blamed the Jews for bringing the Black Death to Europe. And so the Jews had practices because the Jews had these practices that did not seem normal to the average European. They had a weird diet, and they mostly lived in some like smaller communities and isolation kind of from others. And so in the 1351, 60 major communities and 120 smaller communities were destroyed, Jewish communities, because the Europeans thought that they brought the Black Death. The Medici family comes to the power, and they are patrons of the Italian Renaissance culture, and so they kind of establish like the wool trade for banking, and they like change the system so that the monarchs kind of get out, and it's kind of more of like a free trade culture and political kind of thing. So Louisa Woodvale says, quote, "Would such mobility have been possible without the social and economic upheaval caused by the Black Death? Historians will likely debate this question for many years," end quote. And so, again, you know, the Black Death kind of caused these economic and political changes, and obviously medical changes. And so, although we often think of the Black Death only causing medical changes and taking kind of Europeans' population downhill, the Black Death also was a very huge pandemic for Europe's population and Europe's culture, and it changed Europe's culture in many fundamental ways by medically, economically, and social politically. So that's the end of this week's Viva. I'm sorry this is late, and I'm sorry if this is really bad, because it probably is, but it's fine. I'll probably rewrite it one of these days in quarantine. Stay safe out there, kids. Don't talk to strangers 6 feet apart, and wash your hands for about, 2 minutes or whatever. I don't know. So whatever, just stay safe. Make some friendship bracelets. That's what I'm doing. I can show you guys. Ready? Ta-da! Pet your pets and live your life. Bye.